Welcome back to the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. Today I'm chatting with my good friend Leigh from Little by Little Homeschool. We are going to talk about homeschool, obviously. She has already graduated a student. She's still in the thick of homeschooling, but she's on the other side of it in some respects as well. And so she's going to offer her encouragement for moms who maybe doubt their ability to homeschool, but then also for those of you who are in the thick of it, why it is so important, why we value it. As you all know, I've been homeschooling with my kids from day one, and I am very, very into homeschooling. I probably don't go into it even as much as I should, mostly because like Leigh and I, we just finished the interview. We were just chatting a little bit afterwards, and we were talking about some of the things like I feel like I'm not allowed to say that I'm sure some of you are like, I wish you would just say it. But it can be a hot topic because not everybody has the same opinions on it. Mine are strong, but whether you're interested in homeschooling or just curious, join us for a very inspiring discussion. My name is Lisa, mother of 7 and creator of the blog and YouTube channel Farmhouse on Boone. Join me as I share with you my love for creating a handmade home from scratch cooking and a little mom and entrepreneur life along the way. Hey, Leigh, thank you so much for joining me to talk about homeschooling. This is something that I don't really talk about on here a whole lot, but when I do, I get a lot of moms who are happy that I talked about it because it's something that a lot of us are in the trenches of doing daily. So let's start with introductions. Tell us about you, your family, your homeschool experience, your podcast, or whatever else you want to share.
Sure. Yeah. So I am Leigh Nguyen, and I podcast over at Little by Little Homeschool. So I got into homeschooling. I'm in my 12th year right now, and I have 2 graduates, and I'm down to 1 kiddo. He's in 9th grade, which I feel like is like the reward for all the years that I've kind of done and put in. And so kind of got into homeschooling, not planning on it. Kind of a reluctant homeschooler, and just really felt God calling us to do so. So here I am at this point now. And you and I connected years ago over home DIY, decor. And about a year and a half ago, I felt called to just kind of move away from that a bit and really focus in on homeschooling and encouraging moms that are coming into homeschooling, because I didn't have that when I started homeschooling.
Yeah. Did you mention the name of your podcast as well?
Yeah. So it's Little by Little Homeschool.
Okay. Yeah. I thought that's your blog and your podcast. So
yeah. When I was
awesome.
Like, all right, I'm going to do this homeschool stuff. What am I going to name it? And I just kind of was thinking about it for a while. And I was like, nope, we're just going to stick with Little by Little. That's the theme we've got going on.
Yeah. So what is your philosophy on homeschool? You mentioned homeschool as a lifestyle. Can you explain that idea to anyone who is new to it?
Yeah. So a lot of us come into it with a mindset that we grew up with public school, basically. And we think of it as 2 separate, different things. And really, it just can be an entire way that we do our life. And I see you and your family do that as well. So it really is just an opportunity. Homeschooling as a lifestyle is an opportunity for us to do life with our children and to lay that foundation of, I like to say, like, who are the adults? Who are the people you want to put out in the world? Let's lay that foundation for those people. So that's really what I kind of think of as when we think about homeschooling as a lifestyle. And that's, I guess, really the basis is, we have this time with our children at home, and let's lay that foundation well and be intentional about it.
Yeah. It sounds really obvious when you say it like that. Well, we're just going to educate through the lifestyle. But I find that this is actually a really hard thing for moms, especially moms who have done the traditional school system for a really long time, to wrap their heads around. So like you go from something that's very separate and structured, and then it's supposed to naturally integrate into your life. So how do you see this being something that's hard to grasp whenever someone maybe pulls their kids out of school? And then how do subjects like math, history, science, some of those things tie into a natural homeschooling? And I guess I forgot to ask this question. Did your kids go to school before you started homeschooling as well? So is this something that you also dealt with?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So my past education was all public school, and my husband went to private school. So homeschooling wasn't anything that was on our radar. My daughter went to public school up through second grade. My middle kiddo, my older son, he went to kindergarten. And then my youngest went to like 1 year preschool and then pulled them all home. So we started out, when I started homeschooling, I had a third grader, first grader, and a preschooler.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question's kind of about like, how do you shift your mindset, even though that sounds really straightforward? We're going to teach through a lifestyle. How do you shift your mindset from that? And what distinctions are there from this very different model?
Right. Mostly because of my background of making that shift, I give a lot of grace to homeschool moms because I really think that it is a journey that we go on. And I'm starting to see, though, more and more homeschool moms that already have done this mindset shift when their kids were little and babies. But a lot of us that are further down the road and have older children haven't had the opportunity, haven't had that spoken into us. So it is really something that we learn as we go through it and as we do this life with our kids. And so I think the first thing is to give ourselves grace and understand that there is a mindset shift and it's not going to happen right away. And that's why, I don't know if you've heard of the term deschooling at all. Are you familiar with that?
Is it similar to unschooling?
So unschooling is more of a homeschool style, the way that you actually homeschool. Deschooling is described as that period of time that you take, especially if you have kids that have been in school, and you take them out of school. And sometimes, often with older kiddos, it's harder for them to acclimate. They're like, wait a minute, you're mom and teacher, and we have to do math here at the kitchen table. And they don't really know, how does that look? What is that like? And so deschooling is a time where basically it's like a decompression, and you just kind of let go of all of those preconceived notions that you have of school and education, and also that you might have of homeschool. And it just kind of gives you some time just to live as a family and really get to know each other, depending upon how long your kids have been in school and how long you've been separated and kind of fragmented out as a family. It can take a while to rebuild those relationships. So really a great thing to do is deschooling. Some people are more hesitant about it, and that's okay. Not every family wants to jump in and do some type of deschooling, which you could take a very unschooling approach. And a lot of families look at it as unschooling. So yes, deschooling can take an unschooling model, a style of homeschooling, but then you can also, after that, if you want to get to be more traditional homeschoolers, you can, or if you want to move into the unschooling model that you enjoy that, then they can do that as well. But really, there's just this mindset shift of separating out, because we're so used to school academics, and this is the way that we do school, is the kids go to the building and they do school, and then they come home, we have our snacks, we do homework, sports practice, and all those things. And it's really a time of learning how to be a family together. And, at that point, you can kind of decide what kind of style of homeschooling, what do you feel most comfortable with? And like I mentioned, traditional homeschooling, a lot of homeschoolers tend to go to that first because that feels comfortable. It's like a safe place in order to feel like you are educating your children, because it can feel scary. Like, my kids aren't going to be prepared for the future if I don't do it this way.
Yeah. So could this look for a lot of families like a year that you don't buy a formal curriculum and you spend a lot of time maybe like going on field trips, or how does that process look? Because the reason I'm asking you this is I've seen a lot of families who really desire to homeschool, really feel that God has led them to that. And then they do it for about a year. And because their mindset hasn't shifted around it being school at home versus a whole different thing, they quit. Because if you are actually trying to like be a teacher to 5 different grade levels and do all the things that a teacher does at a regular school, it is going to probably set yourself up for failure. So how does that look so that way that doesn't happen?
Yeah, it can be a personal choice. And I have worked with families that have different takes on it. Some are willing to give it a few weeks. Some are like, that's all I can do. It just is too hard to let go too much. And so I've heard around the homeschool corners, they might say to give a month for every year a kid is in school, but that's really hard. If you have like a 9th grader, like 9 months, I don't know if I can let go that much. I suggest to people that if it's too hard to completely let go of things, to maybe just focus on reading and math and let the rest of the time, let the history and the science become a bit more natural. Like you said, field trips, go to the science museum, go out into the world, into nature. And there's so many, I mean, when it comes to science, it's so easy to be able to find those things. And in history, if you live, especially in a area that has a lot of historical sites and places, you can go and visit those. So it really can be a time that is personal to a family. But I also encounter sometimes a wife really wants to homeschool and the husband, the dad, isn't really quite sure about it. And so when she presents like, how about deschooling? He's like not into it. I'm like, okay, let's just stick with like more of a traditional approach. But back to your question about, quitting after a year, it can feel so overwhelming. So when we think about public school and say you have a third grade teacher. So this third grade teacher is going to teach, yes, different children every single year. It'll be a different group of 20 kids, but she's basically doing the same thing every year. When it comes to homeschooling, it's not the same. As you know, it's not the same every single year. Every year can be very, very different depending on the ages you have and the personalities and what your focus is on those years. What are your lessons that you want to take time to impart to your kids and where you want to spend your time. There are going to be years, and I won't lie, there's years I wanted to quit too. And it just goes with when things get hard, we want to quit. But I'm so glad I didn't. Here I am on the other end after graduating to high school students. And at this end, I'm like, wow, it was worth all of that time. It was worth those times of not quitting and telling my husband beforehand, don't let me quit. No matter what, don't let me quit, because I know that there is a reward to this. I know that there's a benefit and a blessing to this, especially if God's called you to such a thing. It can be hard to keep pushing through, but just keep leaning on him. And maybe that's a year where you feel like quitting. Maybe that's a year you step back from some very rigorous academics and you just take that year and do a bit more of an unschooling approach if you've been doing something that's more of a traditional approach.
Yeah. Yep. I totally agree. Usually whenever we get criticism from anybody that's not in the homeschooling world who has a lot of questions about why you might be homeschooling, it usually is because they're thinking of it as you trying to do school the way school is done in public school at home. And they're just like, how could you possibly do that? And I'm like, well, it's a little bit different. It actually looks a lot different than that. You talked about it being worth it. What benefits have you noticed from homeschooling your kids, particularly homeschooling as a lifestyle, now that you have a graduate? What kind of encouragement from the other side can you give us?
Yeah, I would say the biggest benefit for us has been relationships. Mm-hmm. And we just have had time. It just sometimes would make me teary-eyed when I look over and I would see one of my children maybe struggling with math. And I'm like, okay, I'm not ready to quite step in. I want them to, feel this a little bit. And then I'll look over and I'll see their sibling just kind of tap them on the shoulder and just kind of give them a smile, just like a nod, like you've got this. And so I've seen the three of my children have such strong, close relationships. And I think that's because of the time that we've had together. And that doesn't mean that if your kids go to public or private school, they can't have those. But I really think there's a different level of relationship that comes with the time over years. And we go on field trips. Like that's your buddy for the field trip. That's who you're going with. And just, I would say relationships is the biggest thing that we have seen as a family, is that we've got this bond that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, that's been our driving factor too. We made the decision to homeschool whenever I was pregnant with my first child. So this was never even a question for us, that we were entrusted to this child and we will spend time with this child. And it's looked different over the years. It's taken many different forms. We've had more kids since then. My husband came home to work with my blog and my business over 4 years ago. And so now he's here. So it's, in the beginning, obviously it was just me for 8 years and 4 kids. It's looked different over the years, and we've had different challenges. Certain kids, are so easy to teach math and reading to. Some kids are so not. It's just been like a night and day difference. But like you said, there's really nothing that can replace that time together. And I know in some ways we want to sugarcoat it and be like, well, but you can do these certain things. But really, the more time you spend together, those relationships are just going to be easier to develop. And that's been our experience too, this family culture that we've built around with learning together, spending all of our waking hours together. So, and that's not to say that we don't have like separate times like this in the afternoon. We have kids over there and kids over there. This is usually a time that we do more of that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of time to work on those relationships, good or bad, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I felt that growing up. I had 3 younger brothers and didn't really form solid relationships until we were older and in college because we were just kind of fractured and out. And that was really the time. And
Yeah.
they're awesome. I love our relationship now. So it doesn't mean that you can't get that time or anything. But yeah, just homeschooling, by being there day in and day out, by seeing each other in the high moments of when they've accomplished something, they've working on their typing program and learning how to type on their computer, that, hey, I passed this certain level or something, and they can all cheer for each other. And yeah, and not that we're not separated out and don't do separate things sometimes, but just having that overall, we just keep coming back to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always think about how now my best relationship is with my sister, but we spent all of our like grade school and high school years developing relationships with other people that, not that they're not still, you know, like people that we talk to every 6 months or so, but my everyday person that I talk to, that we get together, you know, that has been the most lasting relationship through it all. Like the other ones didn't end up, you know, not that they can't, I'm not saying that they can't, that people don't have lifelong friends, but the person that has understood the most about, you know, my life situation, that relationship has been the most meaningful, is that relationship as a child. And so I'm like, man, I wish I had spent more time just working on that one when I was a kid and my other sisters versus like, I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to say that there's not value in that.
No.
And my kids have friends too. But the most valuable relationships they're building are within this family culture.
Yep, I completely agree. And we run into that with kids, especially as they get older. Friendships become really important to them. And there were times where friends were kind of pulling kids and, you know, and I would get them together and I'd be like, look at this person right here. This is who you're going to be doing Christmas with in 20 years, not that other kid or something.
Yes.
This is who, when mom and dad are old and having trouble, like this is who's going to be by your side to walk you through those times. And so just kind of pointing that out to my kids, you know, they have different personalities. Some kids I have to speak like that a little bit more too, and a little more straightforward.
Oh yeah. We have certain ones that buddy off too. It's not necessarily based on age. It's not necessarily based on gender, you know, with who ends up being like the best of friends. But ultimately, I'm like, these ones are going to still be here for you later, no matter what, you know?
Yep, exactly. I feel the same way.
Taking a break to tell you about today's episode sponsor. You guessed it. I love them and share them all the time. Tubes & Co. Organic Skincare. If you are looking for clean, simple ingredients in your skincare, which you should be, because our skin is our body's largest organ, and what goes on the skin actually does make its way in. And so if you are picky about what you eat, you should also be picky about your skincare. I understand though that a lot of times organic and natural skincare, it just doesn't work as well. Your skin is left feeling dry, or if it does feel moist, it maybe feels oily. You want something that actually works. And the Tubes & Co. organic products, like their tallow balm, it's made from, obviously from an animal, from grass-fed tallow. Because of that, it actually does absorb in and do the intended purpose of moisturizing your skin. I also love their cleansers. I'm really loving their makeup. I find that the products are beautifully effective. So they are natural, they are organic, but they also work really well and don't leave me feeling like I have a bare face, which is not always a bad thing. I have that a lot too. But whenever I wear makeup, I want it to feel like I'm wearing makeup. I want to cover all of the imperfections in my skin. And I have found that in the foundation from Tubes & Co. and the different bronzers and highlighters. I'm still getting better at figuring out how to actually apply makeup, because that is not something that, I'm not a beauty guru, but I do like to look nice. Tubes & Co. is made in the USA, based in the USA, a small family company. If that's something you love to support like I do, make sure to go over to tubesandco.com. Use the code FARMHOUSE for a discount. Again, tubesandco.com, use the code FARMHOUSE. Okay, with homeschooling as a lifestyle, how have you seen, you work with a lot of homeschool families, How have you seen this look very different for different families? Can you think of a few homeschool moms that you've personally met as examples of how different homeschooling as a lifestyle can look?
Yeah, it's actually been really fun when you asked me this question then prior. I was like, oh, I actually knew right off the top of my head who I was thinking of, a couple different families.
Yeah.
And just in my personal life, I have some families that I'm thinking of one specific family that is very like science focused. And they have gone to every science museum that they possibly can ever go to. They do experiments. They just do high level science is what they've done. Not that they haven't done the other subjects as well. And the neat thing is to watch their kids have all gone into onto college and into science, technology, engineering type of future, jobs and courses of study. And
Right.
so then there's other families that you'll see that are more focused on the arts and music and maybe the humanities. And then other families, I can think of your family and you guys, from what I see, is focused on the homesteading and family time together and just creating just this family culture together and learning how to work and take care of animals and what does that all look like, more of an integrated. So it's actually been really neat to be able to work with families. So through my course, I've been able to directly talk to different families who are just getting into homeschooling or have been homeschooling and just watch them realize that they have a family culture and to figure that out with their husband and then to embrace that and be like, that's okay. Because we can oftentimes, especially with social media, you'll see families out there and we'll often think as homeschool moms, like, well, she's doing so well and she's doing it this way, so I need to do it that way. But maybe that style of homeschooling doesn't really jive with you, or it might not jive with you in this season of life. And we can really compare instead of just embracing exactly what we're supposed to be doing right now in this season with these, with our children at this age and as far as homeschooling and just our entire lifestyle. So yeah, I can specifically think of families that are very focused on specific areas and some that are very academic and rigorous, other ones that they've raised like biblical theologians because that was their focus. And not that we don't include the Bible, include scripture and those kinds of things, with these children have gone on to become pastors and, leaders in the church. And it's just is a way that we kind of can focus on that. But that doesn't mean that just because a family focuses in on that your kids are definitely have to go down that path. I've kind of taken more of an approach of looking at my children individually, and especially during the high school years, and creating a high school curriculum. I guess I could say curriculum loosely, or just experiences that will meet the gifts and the abilities that I see in them, as well as their interests, and then just kind of steer them in that path. Because as you know, when you have kids, they're all can be very different. And so that's kind of been a bit more of my approach when it comes to the older grades.
I think it's important too to talk about different people being better suited to do different things, because that is what's so beautiful about homeschool, that you can tailor to someone's individual personalities. Like, nobody in our family is going to be one of those super rigorous academic type. They just don't come from, like, it's just not going to happen. We just aren't, I admire people like that, but there aren't going to be children from me and Luke who end up like that. We're definitely going to have more of a creative approach and very experimental with a lot of things. And so that's what we've witnessed with our kids. Now, of course, there's differences within the kids. There's certain ones who are better at some things than others. But I really like what you said about observing some people and they go all in on science. Their kids become engineers or doctors, and they were able to tailor the education to those leanings, which is what is so beautiful about homeschool. It doesn't require everybody to be the same. And that's something I had to learn very early on. I had to be okay with the fact that our homeschool, just based on our personality types, is going to look different from, some other person that I maybe know in real life who is a very different type of person. It's okay. I don't have to compare myself to them. I don't have to think like maybe my kids would be better off if I force them to be like this, which in reality, they're not, because, there are natural leanings for things. This isn't just something that is a result of, how you are educated. You send all the kids to the same school and they all come out very different. And that's because there's personalities that are innate.
Yeah. And I like how you said a person. Like us as moms are all very different. You get together just 10 different homeschool moms and we're going to be very different. For all of our homeschools to look alike would not make sense. So of course our homeschools are all going to be very individual too. And I really think we need to, my tagline for my podcast is to create and embrace your homeschool lifestyle, and just the fact that there is a lifestyle for your family. And we just need to embrace that. And I think that comes down to also us as moms, as women, just embracing who we are as people, and realizing that God has given us specific gifts and talents and abilities. And those can come out when it comes to homeschooling. And sometimes if we don't know what those are in our life, it's always good. It's good to ask somebody, like, what do you see in me as the way that I am and my gifts and my talents? What does this look like? And it's, you can get some insight. And children, you can ask them as well. And they'll just very honestly let you know what they see. And they also are a reflection of us. And as you're saying, and, like, our kids aren't going to probably be like this. Your kids, that doesn't mean they're going to be anything less. We just all have a place to fill in this world. And we all have gifts and all have ways that we can minister and to be with people. And yeah, it's just a beautiful thing to realize that we're all can be very different. And it's actually really a good thing.
Yeah, and it's fun being able to give your kids opportunities to do things that they're going to thrive in. So some people are very naturally athletic. So maybe, you give that kid the access to do a lot of athletic pursuits. Some kids need craft supplies. Some kids might need building materials. I love that freedom with homeschool, that you figure out what it is that your kids are naturally drawn to. You give them everything they need to do it, and then you give them time that's very unstructured so that they can actually pursue those interests. That's something that in the last maybe 5 years, since we now have 14-year-old, 12-year-old, 9-year-old, that I've noticed more and more is, these kids can actually do like real stuff. Like they can make a real meal and pie or dress from scratch. I'm actually looking out the window on the line, hanging a dress that my daughter just made for my other daughter. That's because around age 7 or 8, she started experimenting with stuff. And then over time, she's just had a lot of time to just kind of, fiddle around with sewing endeavors. And I love that. I love that kids who are homeschooled just have so much time and freedom just to try stuff.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And the time is a huge thing. And there's been times where my kids are like, wow, they're kind of giving me a little bit of a hard time. And I was like, you see the bus out there? No, just wait. It's like 8 hours later, there goes the bus again. You would have missed, look at all that you have done. And that took me a little bit of time to realize too, as a new homeschooler, that time is actually a really good thing. And once I kind of embraced that, I was like, okay, in the morning, we'll do our formal academics and our formal curriculum. And depending upon the age, that might not even take the entire morning, but then definitely giving them the afternoon. And even as high schoolers, people will say, well, how long does it take to homeschool high school? You're probably like 6 hours. I'm like, no, probably maybe like 3, 4 at the very most. And
Right.
Their afternoons are free. And the things that they are able to create, it's bigger. Like you were saying, introducing her to some sewing, and now she's actually making a dress. So where it starts off, just maybe just drawing, sewing, making like a little square pillow, and then it grows
Right.
into being able to make an entire dress. And yes, I've seen the same thing with my kids. So time is a huge thing that I think that we downplay, or that we think isn't as important as it really is.
Or even that it's bad in some ways. We live in a culture that every moment is very segmented out. And I know when I first was a mom, first I was married, then I was a mom, there was this time and I didn't know what to do with it because my entire life, my every waking hour was scheduled out. And so I like that homeschoolers, we don't give our kids phones or anything. And I have noticed, and I'm sure this is not true across the board, you could implement certain restrictions and whatnot so that this doesn't happen, even if your kid goes to school. But I have noticed just from some kids that have came over who go to school or who have phones in particular, that as soon as there's like a down moment, the kids don't know what to do with themselves. And they have to get on the phone and occupy their mind. And so I love that there's just time to be bored, and they have all this time to try to figure out something. We don't like being bored as humans. And so with that time, they end up figuring out something good to do with it because they don't want to be bored, whether it's play or they're actually doing something productive. Our schedule looks a lot like yours, where we get everything done in the morning. and then we have lunch, and then we have a lot of time to do those kind of pursuits that, I don't know, I feel like I didn't have time to explore. And if I would have had time, I probably wouldn't have known what to do at that time. And so I love being able to teach kids how to be self-starters in little pockets of time that, I don't know, I think it's a lost skill.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think back to my own self, like just like you, I didn't have free time. There was school, snack, homework, maybe sports practice or something, club, and then heading to bed. And my kids have had time. And I think back to like, where would I be in life if I had had that time? So giving my kids time, my kids have specific interests, and my daughter has really dived into natural health and gardening and just all that goes into that. She just had freedom to like read books and to explore things. We started a book club with some friends, and that was just her interest, was that in the arts. And she's self-taught herself how to watercolor and just all these artistic pursuits. And then my now 18-year-old, I graduated him after 3 years because he was just done. He is an entrepreneur at heart, and he started off with just chopping up some firewood and selling like in front of our house, and progressed then to a little lawn mowing business. And now this past year, he is running a 6-figure lawn care business. And that pretty much was his homeschool for his 11th grade year. He did do some stuff, but like that was just, I found by giving him time that he caught the entrepreneur bug. And whereas I couldn't get him to read other books, he wasn't interested in fiction anymore. And so I was like, okay, maybe we'll try historical books or biographies or historical fiction. He didn't want that. And
not so much.
Somewhere he came across Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Read that, and he was like,
this is
what I'm going to do. And it's just, and I've been like chasing him ever since, and just, helping him figure that out and to work on that. And then my youngest, he's in 14 now. And so watching him just kind of figuring out what exactly is he interested in. He likes more of the computers and the technology. And so giving him access to resources and taking him to library programs. And he built a whole computer. We went to a library program, and they were offering them to build a whole computer. It was like a grant program or something. He came home with a whole computer. Which is something that my other kids wouldn't have been interested in. So I'm like, okay. So it's just really neat to be able to watch and give them time to be able to hone those skills, so that when they're done with their formal years of high school, they're set up to go on to whatever it is, whether it is college or whether it is they're running their own business, or whether it is my daughter stepping into a position with a ministry and doing what she really wants to do. So it's really giving them that time to figure that out. And so I think to myself, where would I be if I had that free time? But then you end up feeling, like you said, we as people need to fill that time, and we find things that interest us and fill it up.
Yeah. Taking a break from this great conversation to tell you about my free blogging masterclass. The way that Luke and I are able to stay home on our homestead, milking the cow every morning, raising our kids side by side, baking sourdough bread, the way that we are able to have all of this time to do this is because of my blogging business. Now, of course, there's more than one way to be able to homestead, but this is what has made it possible for us to do this together. I started the blog in 2016, and by 2018, it was our full-time job. So not very long after. Now, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I feel that I could have gotten there a lot faster if I'd known what I was doing. In my free 1-hour masterclass, I will show you my 4-step framework that I use to become a full-time blogger. I'll also share the most common mistakes that new bloggers make that I learned the hard way, so that you don't have to. And I still see bloggers making these mistakes constantly, and how to make it work on just a few hours a day. I have office hours so that I can separate my life from blogging, and I also share that with you. Now, over the years, I've also added on a few more aspects of the business, like this podcast, but blogging remains my favorite way to connect with my audience and earn an income, because it requires me to be less personal. I can share things that really help people, like recipes. I can focus on my photography. The house doesn't have to be quiet. After recording this podcast, I'm going to go inside and do some blog work, which means I'm going to put in my earbuds, listen to a podcast or something I enjoy, photograph a recipe that I've been working on. It's the most laid back part of my business, and sometimes I want to quit everything and just be a blogger. I recently got an email from somebody who was thinking about becoming a blog course student, and she said that she had been doing some research online and learned that blogging is dead, and so she would like to learn other things like how to be an Instagrammer or be a podcaster or a YouTuber. All great businesses. I'm not knocking any of them because I do all of them, but I do want to let you in on a little secret. My blogging income still surpasses all of those, and it requires the least amount of my time. I know some of you are probably thinking, well, why don't you just quit everything and make more blog posts? Honestly, I'm thinking about that a lot of times, to be completely honest, but I do love connecting with you in this way. If you want to check out my free blogging success masterclass, you can get that at bit.ly/farmhouse blogging school. I'm also working on the new 2023 planner, so that will be out soon. It's a very robust planner with all kinds of checklists and goals and practical tips and places to actually make all that work within a planner. So that is a bonus that you'll get to check out over there as well. Again, head over to bit.ly/farmhouse blogging school to learn about my favorite business in all of this online craziness. By far, blogging. What I think is so cool about all those things you just mentioned is you didn't really have to make your kids do any of that stuff. They kind of just had these certain interests. And I always tell my kids that they'll do things like the other day, my daughter, they had a game night at church, and she got this idea that she was going to make her own game. She came out on her Cricut and she like made all these pieces, and she used a 3D doodler pen to make little pawns. And I told her that that would have been an assignment when I was a kid. Like we would have had this big looming thing where you have to make a game by next Friday. And be like, oh, how am I going to get that done? Whereas with these kids, like they always are doing things that I'm like, that would have been an assignment. But like somehow you're just like doing it because it's fun for you. But okay, like, I don't know. They're always doing things like that. Like your daughter wanting to like look into natural health and the garden. Or like your son starting that business. I went to college and I got a marketing degree. We had to have a business plan for a fake business. I had next to no interest in that, but I'm like, why would I not just have like started a business? Clearly I'm entrepreneurial. Like, why did I have to like go to school? They had to tell me to make this like fake business that now I look back, I got an A on it, but like that was a bad idea. Like that wasn't going to make it. But anyways, I don't know. I just like that you don't have to actually make them.
Yeah, I think it's why homeschoolers sometimes are called weird, because they do things that, you know, whereas in other places would be an assignment and they just do it on their own. They're like, I remember my daughter was in fifth or sixth grade, and she asked to write a research paper. And I was like, really? I was like, okay. So I gave her the resources to know how to write a research paper because that's what she wanted to do. And she wanted to write. She's an excellent writer. And that's something else she does on the side is, you know, write short stories and things that I would have been like, that would have been assigned and I would have hated every moment of it. But she's chosen to do that and wants to do it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Why does it, when it becomes an assignment, like why then do you hate every moment of it? Mm-hmm. But I totally I got my wings when I got out of school and I'm like, oh, now I can do whatever I want. And I'm like, turns out I actually liked this all the time. Mm-hmm. But whenever you made me do it, I hated it. Like maybe that's a personality thing. And so maybe that's why I'm like, wait, this doesn't work. Unless you let people come up with the idea themselves, they don't want to do it. But that could just be my own personality. I'm not sure. But I find them doing stuff all the time. And I'll say, you are such homeschoolers. And the other day, my daughter was like, when you say you're such homeschoolers, is that like a bad thing? I'm like, no, not a bad thing. But it's when they do things like make their own game that I'm like, you're such a homeschooler.
That's so funny you say that because my kids made their own games too. It was this huge board and they tried to explain the rules. And I was like, let's work on this a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my 14-year-old, she's almost 14. I guess she'll be 14 when this episode comes out. She made up a game that actually people could play. Mm-hmm. But then my 9-year-old was like, oh, I want to do that. And then he brought down this thing with all this. And he was like, he was explaining the rules for like 25 minutes. And we were like, buddy, this is not going to work. Nobody can follow along with your game here. But yeah, that's kind of how the second rendition went. But the first rendition, like, it was actually a pretty good little game. People enjoyed playing it.
Oh, that's so fun. Did she bring it to the church game night?
Yeah, they played it.
Good. That's awesome.
I know. It's just, that's those moments where I'm like, oh man, you're such a homeschooler. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just that they get to come up with the idea themselves that makes it more fun. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, I
But
think it's funny you say when you're such a homeschooler, my kids too. And now they're older, we can have conversations and they'll be like, oh, those are really homeschoolers, like they really are homeschoolers. And so we could have jokes and stuff because they understand at this point. When they were
yeah.
younger, they didn't understand those types of things. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just been kind of,
Yeah.
it's fun when they're older and they're like, yeah, I get what you mean. But then that's also been a huge benefit to homeschooling is that my kids, yeah, we're taught to be weird, but like literally every single person in the world is weird in some way.
Yeah.
And like when we're in school, we just felt to like, we have to hide that weirdness. We all want to fit in. And as homeschool, I'm like, you're just around your siblings all the time, every day, all day. I mean, we do things, obviously. I don't keep them sheltered in my house, but they kind of have that freedom. And then if they do go to co-op, everyone else is being weird in their weird way too. And so they kind of feel comfortable to just be weird in their weird way. And it's just freedom in that way too, to just kind of be themselves is what I've seen as a huge benefit to homeschooling.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, on your social platforms, you talk about living a more simple, natural, and homemade life in the suburbs. How has this taken shape for you, and what learning opportunities has it afforded your kids as you've homeschooled them in the suburbs? I think you moved. You haven't always lived where you live, right?
Right. So we were in the suburbs, moved states, moved to the country. About 3 years, we lived in an old farmhouse. That's when you and I connected way back on Instagram. And so lived in that farmhouse, kind of fix it up. We weren't necessarily meaning to like flip it, but then we ended up back in the suburbs, but different suburbs in a different state. And so that time, that couple of years that we had there and just felt a little bit more kind of sheltered, but in a good way. It was a good way for us to kind of get our wings underneath us or our feet under whatever that saying is, just to kind of really lean into who we were. And so moving here and just especially in the past couple of years, I've been like, I'm done with this, all the craziness of trying to keep up with everything and keep up with fashion or the latest trends in decorating. And I've always kind of had a heart towards simplicity. I'm like, okay, so how do I do that here in the suburbs? So I can't have chickens in my backyard. I can't have a cow. I can have a dog and a cat, probably a couple of them. But I can't, as far as town code, have these types of animals. And I'm like, okay, so how can I simplify things? And we had already moved towards just a more homemade, I cook all 3 meals home. Well, lunch, we have leftovers. I make big dinners, really big dinners, so we can have leftovers for lunch. And just how can I do that in a way that is simple and just also then for me supporting the community that we live in. So we get our raw milk and our eggs and our meat from local farms. So between that and I do a lot of ordering from like Azure Standard. I don't know. I think you do order stuff from them or.
Yes, I do. I have to pick up an order tomorrow.
Okay, good. Mine comes next week.
Yeah.
And then whatever I forget to order, I just kind of supplement with like Aldi or something like that. And yeah, so we just really, as far as like just simple, natural and homemade is just us just trying to just be us and just kind of cancel out the noise of the culture in the world of telling us that we need to keep up with all of these latest gadgets. And, we've made different changes to just kind of keep those sort of things out and not really focus on those. We do a ton of DIYs. We do pretty much most things. When my husband and I got married, the funny thing is that he didn't even own a hammer. I don't even think he knew how to like swing a hammer. I think the first thing we bought a hammer so I could hang up some pictures in our apartment that we were living in. And so he didn't know how to do any of those things. And at this point, we've gotten 20 plus years of marriage and 4 different houses. And he's pretty much almost built additions and, been able to build a shed and build all these things that he didn't know how to do before. And so we've really, when it comes to that kind of stuff, as well as cooking and the kitchen and cleaning and just everything, I've included the kids in everything. Because really my goal is like, how can I equip them to step out into the world? And what do I want them to know? Just practical stuff of how to do that. And they know so much more than at this age, even as they are, than I did when I kind of stepped out into the world. And even when I got married, I didn't know a lot of these things. I couldn't cook. I couldn't boil an egg at that point when we got married, but make sure my kids at least know how to do that.
Yeah, I love that you don't have to. I think sometimes people are like, well, you live on a farm, and I haven't always, obviously. We moved here less than 4 years ago, but you can teach all of those things no matter where you live. We were doing all of that stuff in our last house that we're doing here. The only difference is we have a dairy cow. Everything else is pretty much the exact same, in anywhere. And those are such valuable things to teach your kids, just life stuff that ends up coming up just by nature of being around you while you have to do certain things just to keep the family fed and keep the the house renovated or whatever else you're working on, having the kids around to teach them all that stuff is super, super valuable. Just being around adults, you know what I mean? Just not that kids can't be. It's very valuable to be around adults who want to teach you certain things on a regular basis.
Yeah, no, I mean, sometimes you probably have gotten it too. I'll get comments on social media about how, oh, your kids are so sheltered, or I'm like, you obviously haven't met my kids, or they don't know how to socialize. I'm like, my kids know more people in town than I do. Like, if they're not socialized, then I'm a hermit, because they're out there doing things, and they know how to. And that's another benefit of homeschooling, is being able to walk them through all kinds of different social situations on a daily basis, even taking them to the grocery store, not that you can't do this if you don't homeschool, but it's just over and over and over again, walking them through how to live in the world, because they're doing it with you, and then showing them and taking them. And when it comes back to like the projects I was mentioning, we just include them in everything. And it wasn't always easy, especially when they're little and you're trying to teach them how to empty the dishwasher, or to teach them how to cook something, or probably, for you, teach them how to sew. Sometimes it can feel painful, and that you can do it faster and more proficient if they weren't doing it with you. But that's not how they learn. That's how they learn, is by doing it with you. And I figure what better people for kids to hang out with than their parents. And my kids don't.
I have to agree.
Yeah. This is the downside to homeschooling, though. And maybe it's just my kids. I don't know. But they don't get embarrassed by us. I will try to embarrass them, and they are like, whatever, that's just who you are. They'll say that's no reflection of me. Like, okay.
That's no reflection.
Whereas my parents mortified me all the time just by breathing, and my kids don't care. It doesn't, I can't embarrass them.
Is that like a interaction with peers thing? Because now that you mention it, I had the same kind of stuff. And then now my kids, like my daughter's always like, Mom, can you get me those same jeans from Carly Jean in the size 00 and cut them off so we can match? And I'm like, wait a minute. I don't think you're supposed to want to match your mom, but thanks.
That's awesome. Yeah, maybe that's what it is. And maybe we're just cool moms. So we'll just go with that.
I mean, yeah, that must be it. That's got to be it. I don't know. My mom's pretty cool. Like now I think that, but I think as a kid, I'm pretty sure certain things embarrass me. What's up with that?
Yeah. And I think maybe it's the time that they spend with us, that they see our hearts, and they see that our why for, so say the reason I dress the way that I do is to dress maybe a bit more modestly, and tell my daughter and talk to her about, have those conversations with her as to, why do I choose this clothing over that clothing? Or why do we not watch these movies, or why do we not take part in these different things? Is we have this opportunity to give them the reason why. I think I was missing that, didn't know why we did some of the things that we did, or why we didn't participate in some things. And maybe it's just from the time that we get to spend together, our kids they realize we're cool.
It's gotta be it. All right. I have a couple more questions, a couple like homeschool questions. What are some false beliefs about homeschool that hold a lot of people back? And what encouragement would you give to moms who don't feel qualified to homeschool?
Yeah, I think the first one is that we don't think that we can do it. We think there's this magic formula that the school does. And and we'll hear this from people who speak negatively about homeschool. Well, they have a degree. Like, okay, they have a degree and there's wonderful teachers out there. They have a degree in teaching 20, 30 kids at the same time. I only have to teach one, or even if you have multiple kids, it doesn't matter. I'm just teaching this one third grade math. And I'm teaching this one fifth grader math. I don't have to teach a ton of kids. I don't have to worry about managing a bunch of kids that aren't mine either. So I think that the first one is that we think that we can't do it. That we think that there's some magic formula and we can't compete with that. And it just comes with time to see that we can. And I would say that probably the greatest achievement in my homeschooling, because my older two learned how to read in kindergarten and school. And so my youngest was the only one that I had to teach how to read. And I was terrified. Even with having older kids, I was like, I'm not going to be able to teach them how to read. So I would say that's probably my greatest achievement. It doesn't matter if they graduated high school, that I taught a child how to read, and he loves to read. I think it's important when we get like those wins, to recognize those wins of, yes, I taught them how to add. I taught them how to read. I taught them how to do these different things. I can impart that information into them. And then I can go up to high school and people say, well, how are you going to teach them, advanced mathematics or something? Like, well, there's a lot of resources out there for that type of stuff. If they need to get to that, not all kids need to get to a high level math, and just recognize there's a lot of resources. So I would say that the hesitancy that we can't do it, just our self-doubt. And that's when it's really important to surround ourselves with other homeschool moms to realize that they're doing it. I can do it as well. Another one I would say is a huge one is like, well, you kids can't go to college. Yeah, they can go to college if they homeschool. Like those couple of families that I mentioned earlier, is kids are doing really well in college. And the benefit to homeschooling when it comes to college is that the kids oftentimes are used to being independent learners and know how to prepare for tests and how to prepare for papers. And they're just used to being a bit more independent. So yeah, and I think the last one maybe I would say is that we're really worried about being overwhelmed and not getting any time to ourselves. And this is a big one. Like some of us are more introverted than others. And my husband just the other day was saying something about somebody being alone or something. I was like, to be alone. He's just like, you're so weird. I'm like, no, I love to be alone. And maybe it's because I don't get that time all the time. I wouldn't want years of being alone or anything, but just because I don't get that time. But I really would say that for me specifically, that I've come to realize it's okay. It's okay not to get that alone time. And I've come to terms with that that's okay. And now as my kids are launching and they're getting out in the world and I finally find myself a little bit of free alone time, I'm like, okay, I can do this too. I can do this season in life as well. So I would say those three, like that we can't do it. We don't feel like we're not equipped to do it, but there's great curriculum out there. And that's why a lot of homeschool moms, families will jump into just traditional homeschooling with curriculum and sticking to the curriculum because we just don't feel quite ready to steer away or not to do everything with curriculum. Yeah. And then the whole college thing, and then just not feeling like we have time to ourselves.
Yeah. I feel like something that when you're talking about a lot of those worries that people have about kids learning certain things in certain years, I think we forget about the human drive that each person has. And it's almost like if we don't force you to do, learn this certain thing, then you won't learn it. But what I've found is that a lot of times, like we were talking about earlier, the kids do have a drive to learn certain things. And so a lot of times you just have to be there to answer their questions. And another logic type thing that I've always thought is, okay, people who've told me I'm not qualified because I haven't, gone through school to be a teacher. I've been through school. I've been through 12 years of, grade school and high school. I've been all the way through college. So if I'm not qualified, what are you saying about the system that you want me to send my kids to? If I didn't come out on the other side able to teach my kids what they need to know from, I learned to know, you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Of course, I know what to teach them because I'm a functioning adult who has also learned all of those things through all of those years. And so, yeah, I'm sure we have lots of questions, but we can find places to point our kids when they have that desire to learn certain things. And we do underestimate how much a lot of people, most people have the desire to succeed. And so you forget that like these little humans, you don't just have to necessarily like make them do stuff. They'll have a desire for their own personal success.
Yeah. Like we were saying earlier with the time, when something is an assignment, if I like assign something to my kids, they're like, but if I just let them write whatever they want, they'll write something. Whereas sometimes with writing can be like a huge thing that kids don't like to do. But you want to write a commercial? Let them write a commercial. Who says they have to write an essay about a Longfellow poem or something? They don't have to analyze something. Let them write a commercial. If they like to write poems, let them write poems instead of writing a research paper. And yeah, just giving kids the time and the space to do that and giving them the love of learning. So cliche, love of learning, and then teach them how to learn.
Right. No, but that's what I'm trying to say. Like letting that innate desire and process be a little bit more natural has greatly benefited us personally, our family. I can't speak for every family, but like you said, having the love of learning and then knowing what to do with that love, like where to go and learn things, that has been more valuable to me than anything I can like try to, which there's been plenty of things that like, all right, we've got to learn this long division. And there are those moments, but there are so many valuable things that just the culture of loving to learn and knowing where to find the answers, that goes a really long way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you think about anybody that loves to learn, there's no stopping them. And again, we can get caught up. I think about my 18-year-old. I could not get him to read any Shakespeare. Like I was like trying, and I was like, I gave up. I was like, why? Why make him? But he has
that'd be like me reading Shakespeare. That's not going to happen.
He's got this stack of like books that he's like in the middle of reading about entrepreneurship.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, there you go. You and him can hang out.
Right. Yeah, there's just you just can't make everybody the same. You just can't. And there's just something to be said for trusting the process of people like to learn certain things. I think there is something to be said for that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's key. Just trusting the process of kids, their curiosity. When you think about any little kids, you take him for a walk and they're like on the ground staring at you. Can't even see the bug that they're looking at and that they're analyzing, and they want to learn. They want to know about those things. And the beauty and the amazing thing about nowadays is that kids could ask, my 14-year-old asked me the other day, how fast does a bee fly? I'm like, well, we don't have encyclopedias anymore, but let me, I can Google it on my phone and look that up. Right. And then they can
praise the Lord.
Go from there. And we have so much information at our fingertips that we can answer all those questions. And sometimes kids will get hung up on something and they'll pursue that for a while. And then they feel like they've accomplished that. They've learned as much as they can about that. And then they move on to the next subject, whatever the next fascination that is, whether it's reading or poetry or something with science they're interested in, I don't know, whatever it is, they just kind of can move on to the next thing. And once they accomplish and feel like they know enough about that, they move on to the next thing.
Yeah. Like you said, curiosity drives so much. And I think whether you go to any school, that'll eventually happen. Like for me, I feel like curiosity drove me into learning an insane amount of stuff all through my 20s and 30s, like sourdough and fermenting, all of that stuff that I suddenly was so curious. Something sparked my interest, and then I kept pursuing one thing after the next. But that happens for everybody. And so just leaning into that has been really valuable. And I think it's just underestimated.
Yeah. It's just that learning is a lifetime process. It's lifelong. And we can't,
right.
I think that that's also what we get hung up on as homeschool moms, that we have to teach them everything. Well, there's no possible way we can teach them everything.
And they have a lifetime for it.
But then the things that you were interested in sourdough, like you were interested in this, you wanted to learn more. You wanted to take the time to read the books, read the blog posts, watch the videos. And so when they want to do something, they'll take the time to do it. And sometimes you're like, okay, it's time to go to bed here. We gotta shut this down here now. You can get back to it tomorrow. But that's just the curiosity and just the drive, and not having it assigned and told you have to do something. And yeah, just let that kind of lead. I think we underestimate that ability that kids have.
Absolutely. All right. Tell the listeners where they can find you, the best place to follow up and continue to receive whatever encouragement you have, whether they're thinking about homeschooling or are already in the thick of it.
Yeah. So if you're listening to podcasts, so I assume that you like podcasts, so you can head over to Little by Little Homeschool, and I speak specifically about homeschooling and what does that look like. I throw in some homemaking and some motherhood kind of stuff, because it's all integrated. We don't just homeschool and then, clock out and then just sit around and do nothing. It's all a part of how we live. So I would say head over to the podcast Little by Little Homeschool, or you can go to littlebylittlehomeschool.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Leigh. This has been a very encouraging conversation.
Yeah, this has been fun to connect. Thank you for having me today.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. If you have not yet checked out Leigh's podcast, make sure to check it out. She also invited me to come on, so I think I'm going to be going on in January. We'll be having another discussion, the two of us over there. That's the Little by Little Homeschool. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast.